right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second Careers in Science lecture of the semester. I'm Dr. Johnson. I'm a chemistry professor here, and I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Fernanda Burke. She's also a chemistry professor here, and she's going to be talking about her career path, and then she'll be talking about some research that she's been involved in. So please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And as Dr. Johnson mentioned, I'm Dr. Burke, and I teach the second year chemistry, or if you're in the nursing program, then I teach that first year organic biochemistry. I also teach microbiology, so I'm kind of a unicorn in that way, that I have a little bit of biology and a little bit of chemistry, and I'll kind of walk you through how I ended up that way. So, first of all, my journey began in a beautiful place. Have you ever seen this iconic view? Sometimes I'll be at home and the TV will go to, like, you know, just the pictures because I haven't touched the remote. And then I get a little taste of home. So I was born in Rio de Janeiro, right there. So it's on the southeast portion of Brazil. And I was asking my mom yesterday, and I live right here. So had that beautiful view. So I was born and raised in Rio until 14, and I went to an American school. So that's how kind of, you know, you might say you don't have an accent, Dr. Burke, a little bit. I know I'm not from the South, right? You know, I'm not from Lancaster, South Carolina, yes. But I've been speaking English really since I was 6 years old. And so at our American school, it was half day Portuguese, half day English. So really, as long as I remember, I've been speaking English, right? And so I thought this was funny. I didn't have this recollection, but it was, when I came here, was not the first time I was a Lancer. So my school in Rio was Our Lady of Mercy, and we were the Lancers. And that was also where I began to play volleyball. So I started playing volleyball at age 9. I was the same height at age 9. So they thought you have great potential in volleyball because you're only 9 and you're already 5'2". Yeah. So there I am. So I went from the front row to the back row, but still continue to play, and it's been a big part of my life as well. So. But at 14, I was accepted into an exchange program. So I don't know if any of you have had students at your school, or maybe you've been a host to an exchange student. But I was welcomed into a family, and that family was in Port Orange, Florida. And so I went to Spruce Creek High School, the Hawks. And I went to the second world's most famous beach, right? Because I feel like I was from the first most famous beach, right? We can compare the photos at the end, okay? But it is a beautiful place as well. My mom had one kind of ask, it was that we stayed on the coast. She did not see herself living in the Midwest or right away from the ocean. So when picking where to go, she was glad that we got placed in Ormond Beach, is where we ended up living. But I was an exchange student with my brother, and we were tested into the IB program. I don't know if you guys know of the IB program. I think Rock Hill has an IB program, and there's a number of schools in CMS that do as well. So the International Baccalaureate program is a program you can choose what kind of, you know, specialization you want to do. And of course, I went math and science. So I had 3 years of chemistry, 3 years of biology, physics, and math up to calculus 2 in high school. So it was pretty intense, but it was a really good opportunity. So I started college with a whole year, 30 credits as I, you know, started college. So it was a really good experience. But probably the best thing about this program was this lady right here, Miss Mary Allmiller. She was my chemistry teacher. So I met her my sophomore year. And I had her for 3 years of chemistry, general chemistry, organic chemistry, and then biochemistry as well. And she was just my biggest cheerleader. She just, really set me up. Even though I told you I've spoken English all my life, it's different when you speak English in a foreign country. When you move to a country where people speak English, that's their only language, right? I was not as apt at conversation, right? People would talk and I just couldn't follow everything they were saying. And so it made me really kind of, insecure, as lots of us are as we go to high school, but not speaking the language really well was hard, but I was really good in science. And so she really encouraged that. And I was really grateful. And because of her, I was able to get a scholarship my summer between junior and senior year to go to University of Florida summer program. So it was the summer science training program. And now I think they're called REUs. So it's like an opportunity for undergraduates to do research. So you go into a campus, you get assigned a professor to work with, and you spent the summer living there and doing work. And it was my first time doing research, and I really enjoyed it. And so from there, I was able to get a full ride, which was required. My parents said, wherever you go, gotta be free. So they had just sent my brother to Chicago. And so they had paid all his first 2 years and said, okay, you gotta go for free. So I was like, okay, I'll do my best. So I played volleyball, like I said, since I was 9. I did pretty well in high school, and I did get recruited by Newberry College. I don't know if any of you know Newberry is here in South Carolina. I guess going up past Columbia, going towards Greenville, that area there. And so I came to Newberry on the full ride, part volleyball, part academics. So I did pretty well in school. I finished 3rd in my class. So, it was a long way from coming from Brazil, not speaking a lot of English, being insecure, to being able to graduate top of my class, and then to be, honored with a full ride to college. So it was like living a dream for me. Newberry, I was showing my husband this, and he said, there's no pictures of me. There he is. So we met at Newberry College, 1998. So 25 years ago. And so, going to college, was really a dream, and playing sports in college, even better. And then, getting to meet your soulmate, it was just the perfect place to be. And so I was there for 2 years, and I realized that I just wasn't getting enough science. I wanted to go into graduate school at this point. And so I decided I needed to transfer. I told you that I was in high school in Florida, and my parents moved to Florida. And so I decided to go to University of Florida. By this point, I had gotten my green card, so I could apply and get scholarships. So going to University of Florida was free, which it wasn't 2 years before. So I don't know if any of you have that experience, right? Where you're an immigrant and you come in, and it is a long road to be able to get those perks, right? So I was glad that it worked out in timing. So in 2000, I transferred to University of Florida, and I said, what degree can I get that I will graduate in 2 years? I didn't want to stay one more day or pay 1 more cent, right? I was like, let's go. So they said microbiology, and that's what I did. So I did microbiology and cell science with a minor in chemistry. And so while I was there, my brother, who's 2 years older than me, as I mentioned, he was already in graduate school in chemical engineering, and he said, you have to do undergraduate research. That's really what's going to get you into that graduate school. And so, I was like, how do I do that, right? And I know if you've attended the lectures, you've heard about it, right? What do? You talk to your professors, right? You reach out. Now, Florida is a really big school. There's 35,000 undergraduates. And so, it is pretty intimidating when somebody says, go contact. And this is 2000, so technology is not like it is now. And so I did go to my professors and, went to my advisor, and I was able to get connected with a young professor Dr. Carrie Haskell-Lugano. She was just starting her project. She was assistant professor at the time. And I just asked her, do you have a position, something I can do, volunteer? And she said yes. And so I got to work with her on her research, which was on obesity. So we had, oh, I should have put that picture in, that would have been fabulous. We had these rats that were this big. You know, they took the gene out of the rat that makes them stop eating. So all these rats did all day, every day was eat. And they had no way of stopping. They don't have the required, right, biochemistry to tell them you're full. You don't need to eat anymore. And so we did research on the brains of those rats. And then we came up with a pathway that would fix that problem. And so by fixing that problem in those rats, we could potentially design a drug that could help all of us, right? So that was the goal. And so it was really interesting. I mean, who doesn't want to make, right, that perfect diet pill, right? Yeah. So it was really interesting work. And when I was finishing up in 2002, I, of course, applied to graduate school, and she gave me two choices. You can stay here with me, or you can go to the University of Michigan and work for one of her colleagues that she went to graduate school with. And so I went to visit and just fell in love. And anybody from Michigan? It's beautiful there. So I went to the University of Michigan for graduate school. And I worked for Dr. Mossberg. And so this is his group here. And so he had been a postdoc when Carrie was a graduate student. And so they had both worked for the grandfather of peptide chemistry, which is what I ended up training to do at the Mossberg lab. And this is my group here. That's me, and that's my little cube. And some friends, and of course, I love football. And just happened that I lived across the street from the stadium. You can't do that anymore because Michigan is the biggest college stadium in the country. Did you know that? They added an upper section. And so to do that, they had to tear down where my apartments were. But while I was there, I could see into the stadium. I could see the board, the scoreboard. I didn't have to go to the games. So, but I did, it was fun. And so I graduated in 2007 with a degree in medicinal chemistry. So medicinal chemistry is basically organic chemistry, but you're tailoring the compounds you're making for medicine. So how can we help different diseases, treat it, right, with some medicines? And so I worked on heart disease. And so if anybody has been in my classes, you know, I have a patent for a heart disease drug. So I'm waiting for the residues to come in, but not yet. But that was right before I joined here. So I defended my thesis in June of 2007 and started working here in August of 2007. And so these are all the experiences I got to have. So just wanted to put up some pictures. Look how young Dr. Johnson and I look. This was before Professor Cecilia. So, but we got to have lots of fun. And I didn't think I would be teaching. I thought I would go into industry. I would get to work for one of the pharmaceutical companies and, you know, make some medicines and help people that way. But I found that I'm helping people in a different way, right? And by being here and teaching students and hopefully inspiring you, like I was inspired in so many points in my career, right? As I was coming up and, you know, just got those teachers that were just so fundamental. And so it's really special to get to work with the students and even coach the volleyball team, which Professor Hessel and I did for 3 years. So we got it started back. It started in the 80s and then it went away for a while. And then we just started back in 2015 and they're back at it. So, yeah. So that's where I am now. And what do I do here, right? So I teach, of course, but I also do research. So part of our academic pursuit is to teach, but it is also to do service and then to do scholarship. And I chose to do scholarship in chemical education. And so, like I said, I teach the organic chemistry courses. And so that's what I wanted to tailor the labs to be. So, traditional organic chemistry is pretty, much like it was back in like 1950s or 60s, right? Lots of glasswares, big apparatus, and just looking for that yield, how much can I make out of this reaction, And so you follow a recipe and then you hope for the best. And so, it's a little bit like cooking, right? If anybody likes to cook, you follow the recipe, you hope you put everything in right, and then it's going to taste great, right? Sometimes it does. It doesn't, right? And so you don't feel like you're doing a lot of thinking when you're doing that, right? You're just following the steps. And I'm a rule follower, believe me, I loved it. When I was a student, I'm like, yeah, I can do this. I can follow the instructions, But as a teacher, I found that it's really a lot more fun when you get engaged in what you're doing. You get to have some ownership of what you're going to do in lab that day. And so that's what I've been trying to do, is to add what's called inquiry into the lab. So this has been going on for about 30 years in the general chemistry lab. So there's a lot more options to add inquiry into the general chemistry lab. But in organic, there had been, a lag time in getting inquiry involved. And I think, some of the things that have been said is that it's just like more advanced, right? Students don't know enough to be able to come up with their own ideas, It is a little bit dangerous if you, want to think about what you're doing. And there is a potential, right, that you might put two things together and boom. So more so than in general chemistry. But, done safely is really an opportunity to allow students to be part of the design of the experiment, allow them to get an orientation, of course, right? We teach the material in lecture, and then we give an introduction with the information the students need. We give them literature that they can read even further, right? And then you get the opportunity to write your own hypothesis, right? Which then gets checked by the professor and implemented into the lab. Okay, and then of course, we get to think about what happened. Were those good choices, right? Sometimes you learn a lot more from when things don't work than when they do work, right? And so it's just overall a really great learning experience. But what compounds to work with, right? Some compounds can be dangerous to work with, and you really have to have a bit more experience and know-how. But I've been working with esters, so that's this compound here. And so the first lab that I added the inquiry was the aspirin lab. So we used to do aspirin, I think, even in general chemistry, I think, when I started here. And then we did it in organic chemistry, and it was exactly the same thing. It was that cookbook, add this to that. And so I thought, okay, that would be a good one to do. It's a pretty simple reaction. So we are looking to make this ester here group. So this is aspirin or acetylsalicylic acid, or acetylsalicylate. So with the ester group attached. And so what you have to do is then ask some questions, right? You got to make sure the students know basic information. So you teach them what's an ester, right? If you're in my class, you know what an ester is by now, right? Yeah. Okay. So you're teaching that background, and then you're giving that information extra, right? Some papers for the students to read, and then giving them a set of combination of materials. So you can't just go anywhere with it, right? Of course, you got to be able to have the supplies in the lab that you need, but by allowing some liberty for students to choose, okay? And then of course, we got to learn different conditions. What do we have to do? Does it need to be heated? How long does it need to be reactive for? Things like that. And so students can learn and do these things on their own. And then once you have the esters, what kind of reactions can we do? How can we work with that particular compound? And so there's lots of different ways to make esters. And so we teach in the 102 the esterification reaction. So we put an acid, acetic acid could be, and then you put an alcohol, right? And this would be the salicylic acid if we were doing this with aspirin. And then you get that ester bond, okay? Also known as the acyl group. And so, but that's not the only way, right? That's one way. But we can also use, for instance, an acid or acetic anhydride, right? So instead of acetic acid, we can use a different group. Or we can use a ester already and then do a transesterification reaction. So there's lots of different ways that students can go with this reaction. So then it's time, right? You got to think about how are you going to set up these labs for students to be successful. So first and foremost, that pre-lab part is really important. Students have to feel like they have enough information to make these decisions, right? Their students are always a little hesitant. They want you to tell them what to do, right? Is that right? Right? I should know all the right answers, right? But you know it too, right? If you read about it and you look into the literature and you came to class and you learned the background, you should be able to make these decisions. But that's really important, that orientation. And we do that with the pre-lab. So we want to make sure by asking questions and leading the students through the process of thinking about what they're going to do in that lab, right? We build that confidence to make that decision. And of course, at the end of the pre-lab, I check, right? Not going to let anybody set themselves up for failure, right? But there are always lots of good options that come from this. And so that pre-lab is that first part. I don't know if you can see that yellow, but it's orientation, right? Questioning, asking some questions, and then generating the hypothesis. Which mechanism do you want to follow to make aspirin? And so then we do the experiment, right? And so the experiment, usually, like I said, organic chemistry, you have all this equipment. You have, long time to sit for an hour. I call it the hurry up and wait. We hurry up and get everything ready, and then we just got to sit there. Okay. And so how can we make that a little bit more efficient, right? We only have 2 hour labs in 102, for instance, and we really want to have it set up for an hour and a half, because if something happens, you have time to adjust, So thinking about the time constraints as well. And so this was really neat. Again, going through the literature and finding out new ways. People are using microwaves to do the synthesis. How cool. And so students can choose. Do you want to heat the traditional way, or do you want a microwave? And so Professor Galanka kindly lent us the microwave in micro, so I promise it's not the microwave that everybody uses in the lounge, okay, for research only. But we get to do that. So it's really fun to see these things that, we use every day, microwaves for different purposes, but they can be used. And now there's a lot of different synthesis that can be done in under 10 minutes by using the microwave. So this has been really cool. So we get to do that, and then we get to reflect on what happened. So we interpret the results, we test to make sure that a synthesis went forward. Of course, we calculate percent yield. So this is pretty traditional, but by this time, the hope is that students are really engaged. They're really excited about the fact that this is their aspirin. So I titled this lab, Making Your Own Aspirin, right? Because it's your project. And this is eventually, if you choose to go into research, what you're going to be doing, coming up with your own ideas and designing experiments. And so also one thing that we've been doing, and Dr. Johnson has done a great job with this as well, is use the equipment that we have through our research grants and our research lab to introduce students to what they may be using as they transition into a career in chemistry. And so with this one, we use the HPLC. Okay, and then the post lab, of course, we want to have a conclusion, right? First and foremost, were we successful? Did we make aspirin, right? Yes or no? And it's okay to say no. Like I said, you learn a lot sometimes by making a mistake. And so through answering the questions and then talking to everybody in the class, we can come up with the ideal synthetic route, right? Who came up with the best idea, right? And then we can now learn from that experience. And then we can talk about what might have gone better, right? Had we come up with some different routes. So it's just overall a lot more opportunity for learning with the inquiry-based labs. All right, now once you have the ester, what can you do? So my second lab that I'm working still on, and so some of you started it on Tuesday, and some of you will do it this afternoon with me, but we've been doing it now for about 3 semesters and collecting the data, making sure that everything is working. But esters can be used to make soap, right? Something that we all use every day. And so esters are the triglycerides. Right, so triglycerides means that there's not 1, not 2, but 3 ester bonds that you can break. And if you break that bond with a base, sodium hydroxide is what we use, then you can make glycerol plus the salt of your ester. And so that salt of the ester is what we call soap. Okay, and I made lots of soap. So you can see here, I worked with Abigail Lozinga over the summer. I think this was what, 2021? Two. Okay, so post-COVID project here. And so we made lots of different soaps, and what we wanted to show was what would be the best soap bar, right? So that was the question we were trying to answer. And so there's different kinds of triglycerides that you can use. So if you go into the store and you go where the right oils are, right, fats are, you have solids, you have liquids, you have semi-solids, right? There's lots of variation. And what's changing in those is the size change and the kind of saturation that's present in the ester, in that salt. And so our hypothesis was that if we use, right, longer saturated fatty acids, right, so these esters, we would be able to make a harder bar of soap. Okay, and so that's what we set out to do. And we use this durometer to measure how hard the soap is. So it can be used for all sorts of different materials, rubber and plastics included. And so we were able to use one that was for that semi-solid, right? Of course, if it's not hard enough, it'll go right through the soap. And so that gets to 0, okay? But most of the soaps that we made, we were able to generate a hardness. And so you can see here that those saturated fatty acids did generate the hardest soap, okay? And so again, students can see that, right? The expectation is that they can come up. We can give them lots of varieties, right? And making soap is not really, it's something you can do in your own home, right? You know, now you can buy these soap kits, right? During COVID, a lot of people were making soap, right? And so this is something that you can really, you know, potentially do very safely. And so, but the question is, can students understand how to make the best, right, combination of that fatty acid and the base? And so that's what we were setting up to do. And so, and then we wanted to ask the students, what did the students think of that experiment? So we had a survey that we do at the end, and, you know, it goes anywhere from how much they learned, how engaged they felt with the material, okay, and then did they enjoy? Right? Was that a fun lab? They went home feeling happy. Hey, did a good lab today. And so you can see that that glue is effective. So students felt like the lab worked, which sometimes labs don't work, right? We do a lab and it's a dud. And so one of the things that we do when we design these labs is that we really run the experiment. I probably done this experiment 30 times, right? I want to make sure that before it hits the students that we really know that it works, okay? And students should feel successful when they finish the lab, okay? And then do they agree or disagree with some of the questions? And so I think we're almost done, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, the result is that 100% of the students, this is awesome, right? They felt like the lab worked. It was effective at doing what we set out to do, make a hard bar of soap, right? And so 85% of the students felt they were engaged with the material, something that they knew about rice soap, and that they felt like it really kept their attention as we were doing the experiment. And then, of course, we want to know that the science worked, right? And so we can draw a relationship between the saturated fatty acids and the hardness of soap. And so we were able to show that as well. And so I think that's it. So many thanks, of course, to all the students in the last, I guess, 3 semesters that have been working on this and have been giving us feedback. So I know as I was doing it on Tuesday, just always ask students to tell me what they are feeling at certain parts, just so we get an idea, how does it go? And then, of course, my chemistry colleagues who have done the lab in their own classes. When we have multiple sections, they're kind enough to try the labs out for us and collect the data. And so that's always appreciated. And then, of course, funding. So the RISE grant for my aspirin work and the RPS, and then PURE, that was the work with Abigail over summer. So, any questions?
We have time for a few questions. It can be anything about research or about her career pathway. I have a question. So do you have any regrets that you're no longer working on medicinal chemistry?
I mean, a little bit. I think, I went into it wanting to be a doctor. Who doesn't want to be a doctor, right? You're good in science, be a doctor. Yeah. I don't want to be a doctor, that's for sure. But I think that feeling of helping people and being able to, help somebody who's sick is really attractive and something that I really enjoyed about medicinal chemistry. But here I get to help people in different ways. So I feel like I'm still fulfilling that, part of it. But medicinal chemistry is really cool. That's being taught. That's a great way to engage with your professor, right? Asking questions, just coming after class and, having a few words. And I always say, we have open door policies here. So I hope for you it's really accessible to reach your professors, whatever the subject may be. It may not be chemistry for you, but I think we have this real desire to help students be successful. But I think having a common interest is really, a good starting point. And I think that's what happened in high school for me, loving chemistry and then having these teachers who used to come with the earrings with the structures, and she always had a chemistry shirt on, and it was just, you could tell. And then she would write all these equations just for fun on the board, It's like you can really feel the passion in, your professor, and that connection, then it's easier to do. So it's cool.
Whenever you transferred, was that covered by scholarship too, or?
When I transferred to Florida?
Yeah.
Or-
Yeah.
Yeah, because when I went to Newberry, I was on a volleyball and academic scholarship. I was still, international student. I didn't have my green card at that time, so I couldn't get any federal money or state money, anything like that. So then when I went to Florida, one of the reasons I transferred is because I had just gotten my green card that summer. And so I was able to apply for all the in-state tuition help. And so here, I think it's lottery money, right? You're from Florida too, so.
Yeah.
Like we have this big scholarship in Florida. If you scored a certain, I think scored on the SATs at the time and you have a certain GPA. So I was able to get that, but I didn't play any sports in Florida. I tried out, but I was not in their league. They're like top 10 in the nation in volleyball, but I'm like, what's up? Let's go in, have fun for 2 days, and then you're like cut. It was fun. I was young and dumb, as they say. So I started as a middle. At 9 years old in 5th grade. Then I went into setter, which was okay in high school, but then in college, they wanted a 5-1. And so I couldn't do setter because I couldn't be in the front row. So then I was in the back row, which libero didn't exist at the time that I was playing. So I just was a defense specialist. So you can connect with me with volleyball too. So if anybody plays volleyball or enjoys volleyball, it's a passion. I played about till I was 35, and then I said, okay, gotta quit it. But then I went into coaching, which was really fun. So having that opportunity was hard. It was hard work, right? I complained a lot because it was a lot of work. I kept teaching, so I had my full load, and then it was like having a second job, so it was a lot, but it was really fun too. Something, sometimes it's dreams you have, right? I've always wanted to do that. And so I'm really glad that here you get to do lots of different things. It's a small campus. You can just volunteer and say, hey, I'm interested. Can I help? Right? This is something that is coming up, and can I have a spot in there? And so, I encourage all of you to, whatever your passion